So I built Hyrule Castle before one time on PS4, but then I noticed that the proportions was trash and the build was not as good as I wanted it to be, so I built it again in a new world, but then I noticed that those proportions was too small. So after coming to this realization, I jumped into yet a new world for the third time and I built Hyrule Castle yet again, and that will be the post that you guys see over my Planet Minecraft channel, but now I want to rebuild it with the perfect proportions, and why don't we just throw in the whole map to boot? Because why not? Oh, shoot. Let's go. Yo, what up? It's your boy ZainnCraft, and welcome finally to my very long anticipated build series, Breath of the Wild in Minecraft. I'm so excited to finally be bringing part 1 to you guys. Y'all just don't even understand it. All right. So a little bit of backstory, okay? So if y'all did see my Hyrule Castle from Breath of the Wild in Minecraft video, went up about a couple of weeks ago, and I think we just eclipsed 10K views, by the way, so I'm just thankful for that. Thank you guys so much. You guys would have noticed that in the description of that video, I mentioned that I built this castle a total of 3 times, right? So the first time would be the pictures that you guys saw in the intro of this video, and the third time is the Hyrule Castle map that I posted over on my Planet Minecraft channel, which, if you guys want to check that map out, please go give it a download. I think you guys might enjoy it. But I've also mentioned in previous videos and recent comment threads that I've always wanted to build the Breath of the Wild map in Minecraft in its entirety, not just the castle. I'm talking about the Great Plateau, all the way to Central Hyrule, all the way to Akala, everything in the map. I've always wanted to do it. But the restrictions of PlayStation 4 always kept me from making this dream a reality. So I thought that I would just have to settle with just making the Hyrule Castle map for the third time, as proportionate as I could possibly get it, as accurate as I could possibly get it, post that map, and then figure out something else to do. That is until December rolled around and I just completely decided to go ball out and just buy me custom parts for a PC, because why the heck not? I love PCs, I do a ton of other things on them, and to a further extent I love Minecraft, and to me, in my personal opinion, Minecraft is definitely meant for PC. So it just made sense to me. I mean, that was that, and that is also this. So I just went and bought a PC, ported over all my Minecraft worlds from my PlayStation 4, and here we are. So around the time of the release of my Hyrule Castle map, I began wondering how exactly I wanted to tackle doing this map. My PC had just been built in late December, but I didn't think it would be efficient to just jump in and start building the entire map blind, by hand, with no plan. I had just spent 2 years rebuilding the same castle over and over again, so I wanted to get a head start. I wanted something to give me that motivation to rebuild the entire castle one more time. I had already knew that I would not be reusing the Hyrule Castle that I posted to Planet Minecraft. It seemed that the northern and southern edges of the castle were like squashed or squished. If you guys check out the map, you'll know what I mean. Basically, the castle wasn't proportionate. So I reached out to fellow YouTuber Grazzy and I discussed using a height map similarly to what he did for his build. It has seemed that using a height map would give anyone the perfect starting point if they wanted to rebuild Breath of the Wild in Minecraft. But I also just wanted to discuss with him, would it be okay if I went ahead and used this method for my own map? I spoke with Grazzy about this extensively, and gratefully he was very cool with it. Even though it would be my own builds and I would be building the entire map solo by myself, my own ideas, I still just didn't want it to seem like I was taking his ideas, so I wanted to discuss it with him first before I went ahead and proceeded with the map. We hit it off really well, and shortly after I began my map, I began sending him updates every so often, just letting him know how far I had gotten, also giving him any heads up that I may have come across in the map that he could look out for once he gets to specific points in the map. For example, the terraforming of Hyrule Castle, the island had specific key points that I let him know about that maybe he could look out for once he gets to his castle. Just basically helping each other out and building ourselves a nice relationship as fellow Minecraft YouTubers. And not long after we discussed this, I dived into World Painter myself, similarly to Grazzy, except I used a scale of 12,000 by 12,000, and I made the highest point 1024 just in case I needed that extra room. And once we had the completed map from World Painter, I imported it right into Minecraft, and everything from this point on would be me on my own. Diving right into the map, I spawned myself right in the center of the Sacred Ground ruins, just south of Hyrule Castle Town ruins. I immediately flew right to the island the castle would sit on, wasting no time to check out the proportions and make sure that everything would be fine, ready for me to go ahead and start building. And sure enough, everything turned out nearly perfect. The elevation was nearly right, only needing a few tweaks here and there. But other than that, everything was already better than my Hyrule Castle map. All I needed to do was dress up the map. This island that the castle would sit on was about 2 times bigger than my Hyrule Castle map, so I already knew that if I tried to import my castle, it just would not work. And once I flew around the entire island and double checked to make sure everything would be perfect, I immediately wanted to jump in and started creating a couple of templates. These templates would be structures around the exterior of the castle that would be reused and reused more than one time. So without further ado, let's jump into a couple of builds to get us started. Now before I get started on that, one thing I immediately knew that I had to do was raise the elevation where the sanctum would sit. The height map did a wonderful job of giving me a good starting point, but it is still not perfect, and as such, if I noticed any inconsistencies within the Minecraft map compared to the actual game, I went and made those changes, and this was one of them. In comparison to the elevation of the rest of the island, I had to raise this platform up a considerable amount so as to make sure that the grounds the sanctum would be sitting on weren't too shallow. They weren't too low. Once I finished raising up the elevation of that, I immediately began marking out where I wanted the sanctum to actually be. This process was a little bit tedious as the sanctum in Breath of the Wild is actually a circle, and the 4 towers on the outer edge of it, they're not a perfect shape. Like, I don't even know what to call the shape. But nevertheless, after studying the proportions and making sure the shape was correct, I immediately got it down packed and turned everything into stone brick. The lime green wool that you guys see, these will be the stone pillars on the outer edge of the sanctum, and the yellow wool is just the center of each side, just so I know about it, you know, where it is. And then I raised up the elevation of the sanctum. The final thing I wanted to do before building the modules was I wanted to mark out exactly where each tower would be. The sanctum has 16 towers on the outside of it, and they are all aligned in an octagon-like shape. So using Minecraft's line command, I was able to get these proportions down. So starting with the taller and smaller of the 2 towers that would sit on the left and right side of the sanctum, or the east and western side of the sanctum, we began building up this tower. It was very skinny, and I used a hexagonal shape similar to the game. In my old castle build, I actually made it an octagon, but I wanted to keep more accurate to the actual game. It was pretty fun to come up with this design. I think it turned out a lot better than my previous castle build. And at this point, I think it'd be good if I mention that I am using a few textures from the Conquest texture pack. I'll go ahead and leave them on the screen right here so you guys can know exactly what I've switched over. But I'm basically using the Faithful x64 texture pack with a couple of textures from Conquest that I think match the game. If you guys want to know exactly how to use textures from other texture packs in another texture pack, make sure to leave me a comment down below and maybe I can make a video on that. But here I started work on the shorter of the 2 towers that would sit the east and western sides of the sanctum. I believe it started out too tall and then I ended up shrinking it down later on. Yeah, I thought so. But it was pretty similar to the previous tower we had just built, only with minor variations, but still the same. And after adding the little ramp thingy on both of the towers, we were ready to move on. The next 2 towers I will begin working on would be the 2 towers that sit at the north and southern part of the sanctum. These towers' designs are pretty basic, but still had to do them. It didn't take me long to get this design dialed in, and you'll see with the next tower, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just about half the height. And after I get that in there, we were ready to move on to the next module. Now, before I began building the watchtower of Hyrule Castle, I wanted to go ahead and mark out how big I wanted it to be. And for me to do that, I used this island right here in the front of the castle, right next to the Hyrule Castle gate. There are 9 of these watchtowers all over Hyrule Castle, with a 10th variant just a little bit up the path, right outside the first gatehouse. And once I checked the proportions and made sure that everything was fine, I immediately jumped in and started building the module for the watchtower. Now, up to this point, this was probably my favorite module that I had to build build just because I had a lot more room than I did in my previous castle, so I was able to add a lot more relief and depth. I'm starting with the singular lone watchtower that sits outside the first gatehouse, and then after that I will move on and create the one that will be pasted 9 times all around Hyrule Castle. Now I noticed that making the second module of this watchtower at the top, I made it too narrow and too thin, so I do go back and make that change. Moving on into the interior, it was pretty cut and dry to come up with this design. I just made the 2 ladders on either side of the watchtower with pillars in the corners, and then I did the little archway at the door of the watchtower. Once that was finished, I then copy and pasted that watchtower, and I began working on the variant that would be used more prominently throughout the castle. This one just had a 3rd module at the top. It sort of seemed like an actual watchtower for guards to sit atop, and then it had a platform with the Hyrulean royal family banner hanging from the back side of it. Before completing that variant, however, I went back and made the aforementioned change to the watchtower, adding 1 block extra of depth. After that was complete, I went ahead and made the template for the wall that will be all around Hyrule Castle basically. There isn't really much to say about the design of this wall. I just wanted to make sure that it was wide enough, kind of accurate to how it is in the game. It seemed like it would be about 5 blocks wide, but yeah, that's pretty much all it is to it. The next module I want to create would be the 4 gazebos littered throughout Hyrule Castle. Now, unfortunately, in the ruined version of the castle in the game, all of these gazebos are pretty much destroyed, so it's kind of like no reason to build these, but I still wanted to build them and then paste them in, and then once I go and ruin the castle, then we could just get rid of what we want to. Alright, now for the big in the gatehouse. Now I really wanted to completely shatter my expectations and destroy the gatehouse that I made from my Hyrule Castle map. And making the World Painter map bigger than my previous Hyrule Castle map allowed me to use more room for detail and get it nearly accurate. I started with the entrance ways before moving up to the 2nd and 3rd modules of the gatehouse, and I believe that the roof of the gatehouse I'll come back to and make changes to. Now, I don't know why I just had so much fun creating these, but next I moved on to the dead trees that would be scattered throughout Hyrule Castle. There's 2 different variants, basically an oak tree and a spruce tree it seemed like. So I made 4 different designs of each before moving on to smaller shrubbery that I would use also. I went back and made a few changes to some of the modules as I mentioned earlier, such as changing the roof of the gatehouse and this balcony walkway, as well as some of the towers from the sanctum, just touching up their roofs a little bit. Next, there will be 6 of these kinds of towers throughout Hyrule Castle. There will be 4 along the 3rd leg leading to the sanctum, and there will be 2 outside of the sanctum with golden eagle statues on them. So I wanted to create these next. I started with the 5x5 base and I raised it up before immediately starting with the top of it and working my way down. This design wasn't that hard to come up with. I think the only thing that I had a little bit of contention with was the bottom. I just wanted to make sure that the base was kind of secure enough, I guess. And then last but most certainly not least, needing no introduction, there is one single Sheikah shrine within Hyrule Castle that sits within the docks. This will be the same clip that's up on my YouTube channel, so nothing really to mention. I just wanted to build one of these and add it to my palette. And now with all of the modules out of the way, this is what we're looking like currently before any terraforming, barring the little bit of work that I did where the sanctum would sit. But now that I got all my modules complete, I'm gonna immediately jump right into terraforming the island, dressing it up and making it look pretty and presentable, ready for me to start building on. If you guys don't care to watch the terraforming process, just jump forward to this timestamp right here, because honestly, yo, the terraforming is like seriously a lunch break, like for real. It is what took me so long to get this episode out, but yeah, if you guys do want to watch it, order you some DoorDash, get a snack or something. I'm gonna put some music on and yeah, enjoy this terraforming. Okay, so if you guys have made it to this portion of the video, or if you skipped forward, I'm so sorry for taking up this much time of your life, but for 2 months, I also didn't have one myself. As you guys can see in these cinematics, the castle island looks so much better. I've laid out exactly where I want everything to go, from the library to each of the watchtowers. The sanctum outcropping looks so much better now that I've done the actual overhang. I've laid out exactly where I want the castle entrance to be. Everything is just prime and ready for me to go ahead and start pasting in my templates and get the building. Now, as I've said, I do apologize that the terraforming took up this much time. I just wanted to make sure I documented everything, and this is my very first time lapse on my YouTube channel, so I'm still getting used to the timing and how long to make each segment. If it is too long for you guys, let me know in the comments. That way I can make better timed videos so that they'll be more efficient from a viewer perspective. Since it did take me a long time to terraform this castle, and there is a ton of content jam-packed into this video already, I'm gonna split Hyrule Castle into 2 parts. So we're gonna be building the exterior today, so we've already started with the modules and terraforming the island, and then in part 2 I want to go ahead and build the interiors, ruin the castle, and build the 5 great columns at the end of the video. But more on that at the end of this video. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into finally putting together our Hyrule Castle. So first things first, I wanted to go ahead and lay out a block palette for the mountains and the cliff faces of the castle. You guys can see here that I'm using a combination of stone, cobblestone, andesite, deep slate coal, or diorite and calcite. I saved this as a brush in my files, and this will be a template that I use throughout the entirety of the map, and everything that was dirt I completely replaced with this brush. Instead of it being just bare stone or dirt, this mixture of colors gave it a more accurate feel to the game and a more interesting look. I then began to place in all the water around the castle, and let's just say in the beginning of me learning world edit and getting used to Minecraft on PC, the fixed water command, it was very confusing at first, but I ended up coming up with a game plan of how I wanted to do it, and we got over that hump. So as you guys can see, everywhere where there's water in the castle, I'm just filling it up with either diamond blocks and then replacing it with water, or I'll just put water in myself and just do the fixed command. I then created and saved 2 more terrain brushes. One brush was for the edges of the cliffs in Breath of the Wild. They're not just gonna turn instantly into grass. They kind of like have this stone edge. If you go play the game, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I lined all the edges of the castle, and I will also use this template throughout the rest of the map. Then the second brush is for the burnt ground due to the great calamity 100 years ago. This brush will be used on all of the grass in the castle, and it'll also be used in certain parts near the castle in Central Hyrule. Now, first things first, I wanted to go ahead and build up the castle entrance. I used the red wool as a marker, and I lined that up with the ridge that you see behind it where one of the watchtowers sit. I used that in game to see how high the entrance should be, and once I got that down packed, it was pretty much smooth sailing. I just jumped right into building one of the 2 towers. The design is kind of similar to my old build, but I also made a few changes to make it look better and more accurate, and once I got that down, I just copy and pasted it to the other side before I went on to work on the door. Now here's one of the instances of where I mentioned that I used textures from the Conquest texture pack. The iron from Conquest looks pretty similar to the game, as well as the blue terracotta, among a few other textures that I used, so I just thought I wanted to mention that. The next thing I went to work on were the 2 towers that sit either side of the balcony of the observatory room. I did have to end up making these slightly taller, but other than that, the design was pretty easy to get down. And after creating the wall of the observatory room, you guys will see that I made changes to the terrain behind it to mesh it into the cliff face. I felt like in my previous Hyrule Castle map, I didn't have enough room to accurately capture the 3 doors of the wall to the observatory room, so I'm glad that, you know, everything worked out and I mapped out the proportions accurately this time around. Here you can see me making the changes that I just previously mentioned to the observatory room. It was just a tad bit too low, and then I prettied up the terrain underneath. I then began to work on the wall to the left side of these two towers, and I had to make changes to the terrain as it was an overhang for the wall to sit on. And I think it was at this point that, to me, I started to capture the feel of the castle, because as I looked from far away, it started to come together really nicely. I made the small little cliff face behind this wall where you would be at the second leg of the castle in the game, and then I prettied up the terrain and used my brush to replace the sand. Few minor changes were in order for the wall that I had just made, namely the archway. I wanted to make sure it looked even, not one arch smaller than the other. And then I relocated that center pillar. And here we have a small cinematic of everything we've done so far. This wall with the two towers in the observatory room really set the tone for the rest of the castle. The next part of the build, and arguably the most tedious, was to place in all of the modules that we had just created before. The problem that I began to run into was that all of these towers and the gatehouses were rotated not at 90-degree angles. And if you know anything about World Edit, you know that it does not rotate really well, because Minecraft is a block-based game, so you have to go in there and fix up everything that you rotate. I already knew that this was coming eventually, and there will be many more places in the map where I have to rotate something, so I just stomached it, and I had to go and replace blocks that were missing and dress up everything that rotated not prettily. Now here I added a lot more mud to my ground brush that I'm going to use for parts of Central Hyrule where the ground is burnt. It just captured that burnt look a lot more. And once I'm finished with that, we're going to move straight onto the gatehouses. Now it was at this point where I began to question my sanity, because while these gatehouses look really nice at right angles, when they're rotated, they really screw up a lot, and you have a lot to fix up. The gatehouse on the right was rotated at nearly a 45-degree angle, and this gatehouse on the left was rotated at about a 27-degree angle, something like that. So I had a lot of work to go in and actually fix up on the inside and outside of the gatehouses just to make them look pretty again. The next thing that I wanted to do was work on a floor plan for the inside of the gatehouse. So I was looking at the game, and while I was building this, I noticed that cobblestone and deep slate cobblestone, they look really similar, but I think it's just due to the shadows in Breath of the Wild that make it look a bit darker. So I used cobblestone on the outer ring, deep slate cobblestone on the inside, and then I lined the outer edges with dark oak wood variants. I took my floor template and placed it inside the gatehouse before I immediately began working on fixing up the interior of the gatehouse. This process took me around an hour to an hour and a half, simply because you had to really make everything look as pretty as you could get it just because of the rotation. So I did the best that I could, and I think it turned out pretty good. Now I knew I had to go ahead and get it on over with, so I immediately jumped onto working and fixing up the second gatehouse. And to be honest, this one wasn't as bad as the first one, simply because it was more closer to a 45-degree angle. So I just jumped in, and like I did with the last gatehouse, I worked on the exterior before jumping to the interior. The 4 outer towers of this gatehouse actually did not hang off of the border of the second module. They actually sat on the roof. So I just made this change, and then I immediately went and made a new floor template for the second gatehouse, as the template in the first and second gatehouses are not the same. So I created a second one, and then I took this and pasted in like the first gatehouse into the second gatehouse. I then went and embedded this gatehouse into the riverbed. The second gatehouse actually sits in the water, so I made this change. And then I repositioned the gatehouse so that it could better align with where the bridges were gonna go, as you see with the lime wool. Now here I've got more interior work, and as I said previously, the interiors of the two gatehouses are not the same. The walls inside the second gatehouse are kind of made out of like stone with like a stone mural painting inscription thing, whatever you want to call it. So I made this adjustment, and yeah, I think both the gatehouses turned out good for the rotation. I then began working on all of the bridges outside each gatehouse before I moved on with anything else. I really enjoy making these because in my previous Hyrule Castle build, I didn't really like them. They were okay, but they just weren't accurate. So it was really fun to come up with these. Here I pushed back the shoreline of this shallow river because in the game, it goes right up to the face of the gatehouse. And then I began working on this dark oak bridge outside the second gatehouse, and I used the line command to connect the iron bars up to it. And after we finished this bridge, we moved on to the second one, which was pretty similar to the one outside of the first gatehouse with only a few minor changes. Now after we finished that, we moved on to the exterior of the spiral staircase room, and I had a decision to make with this. I either wanted to go with stone brick or deep slate stone brick. As I said earlier, deep slate and stone brick, in the game you can't tell which one you should go with for Minecraft because of shadows, but I stuck with my gut and I let the shadows of shaders do their work in Minecraft, and we went with stone brick. This also was fun to create as I feel like it completely destroys my old one. My old one looked nice, but this one looks far more accurate. And then I began to work on the pillars supporting the grounds above the structure where one of the destroyed gazebos would be at. Now moving on to the inside, I had to put in the stone ceiling, and then I also had to push back the mountain face. And then there was a giant pillar in the center, and there were a few archways connecting each side of the structure. Lastly, I began to put in my sand and replaced it with my brush atop this structure, and then I began to place in the 4 gazebos that we built previously. Now the next structure on my checklist was Princess Zelda's study, and to a further extent her room, but we're gonna start with her study first. Like the towers outside of the sanctum, I went with a hexagonal shape at the bottom, and then I made more of an octangular shape at the top, and I also started with the base of the tower. Now moving on to the tower above Princess Zelda's room, it is a circular shape, so there is no difficulty with that. I made the bridge first before moving on to this structure. And like the rest of the builds in this map, I wanted to make sure I completely blew out of the water my previous creation. Due to how I mapped out my previous Hyrule castle, I wasn't able to really show off Zelda's room. If you look at it in the map, you can see that it's kind of obscured by mountain structures, but thankfully due to height map generation, you can see Princess Zelda's room clearly from all sides. I then built up the cliff face on either side of her room, replacing all the sand with my brush mentioned earlier, and then I went ahead and finished up the structure. Next, I went ahead and tackled the pillar that holds up the balcony outside of Princess Zelda's room. And then I went ahead and finished off the bridge, creating the archway underneath. Now, one of the structures that I was really looking forward to recreating was the library. As you guys can see in this version of the map, the library is much longer and it's also at the curved angle that it's supposed to be at in the game. And I think that it just turned out much better than my previous iteration of it. Next, I went to work on the platform outside of the dining hall. There isn't really much to say about it, it's just a cobblestone platform, but I also made the bridge to the left side of it. Here I had to reposition the watchtower outside of the dining hall to make adjustments to the cliff face underneath. In the game, the dining hall platform has 5 pillars underneath supporting it, so I had to make way for these pillars by adjusting the cliff face. I then marked out exactly where I wanted the dining hall wall to be at. Using different colored wools, I cut into this overhanging cliff, and I also added the singular lone window to the left side of this wall. Here you can see that I added in the balconies that sit outside each gatehouse where each guardian turret will sit, and I also did create the dining hall wall. For some reason, the footage for both of these got lost in translation, which really did annoy the hell out of me, but whatever, here you guys can see it. And then next up, I'm gonna go ahead and begin pasting in the wall that we built earlier for Hyrule Castle. Oh yeah, we added the little lily pad in this waterfall where you know, find the Korok. Now we're nearing the end of the exterior of Hyrule Castle, and one of the last things that I wanted to do was create all the different entranceways to the interior of the castle. Starting with this one right outside of Zelda's study. It was a pretty simple design, and this would be reused a couple more times all over the castle. Now moving on to the second design, this design will be used to get inside the lockup, library, west passage, and east passage. And I also put the bridge right here at the bottom of the island outside of the docks. Now finally, before we move on to the sanctum, I needed to create this balcony looking thing. There's 3 of these in Hyrule Castle total, and they're all around the 3rd leg of the castle near the sanctum. So I built one of these, rotated it and pasted it in 3 different times, and then I filled in the holes and made it look pretty again. And then last but not least, I pasted in the last 2 of these towers outside of the sanctum with the golden eagles on the top of them. And then I embedded them into the waterbed down below. Now we're ready to get to work on the actual sanctum. So I went and pasted in the towers that we built all the way back in the beginning of this video. And at first I thought I wanted to rotate them as well because that's how they are in the game. But I just felt like they didn't look as pretty as the other build, so I left them on the 90-degree angles. And then with some of the towers being pasted in, I had to make subtle adjustments to the terrain. So you'll see me doing that here. This tower here actually sits on top of this platform beneath the sanctum, so I had to make this adjustment, and I also had to bring out this outcropping as well. Next, I marked out the sanctum underpass. There are 4 of these kind of like house looking structures that you can walk under basically. I marked out exactly the proportions I wanted, and then I began to build on this. I built this one time already. You guys can see it over there on the right just out of the shot, but it was much too small, and this one is far more accurate to how it is in the game. I then pasted the underpass in, and each of the 4 are actually different in their own regard. For example, some of these underpasses have less windows than the others, so I made these subtle adjustments as well. I then began creating all of these archways, connecting all of the towers back to the main part of the sanctum. And I think that it was at this point when the sanctum began to come together to me, because in my old Hyrule Castle build, these archways, they didn't look nothing like this. Another part of the sanctum that I really enjoyed building were these diagonal exit ways from the sanctum. I actually made the arch at the end of these exit ways a lot more accurate to it was in the game. In my previous build, it was just kind of like a hoop, like a horseshoe. It was kind of lazy, but it was also too small. I then began to map out this walkway platform atop the first module of the sanctum. I started out with a base square at first, and then they have circular outcroppings at each end, and they also have archways in the middle of each part. Next, I began to fill in the blanks of half of this before copying and pasting it over, and then I also laid out in yellow wool the 4 towers that sat in the circular parts of this outcropping. Once I added all the detail to that outcropping, I began working on the outline to the Champions Hall. This too was an octangular shape, so it wasn't really much to say about it. Like most of the other builds that I'll be doing from here on out, I began working on half of it before mirroring it to the other side, and this design was pretty fun to come up with as well because it looks a lot better than my old map. The entire process of building the exterior of this castle was just a blast because it wasn't just about rebuilding Hyrule Castle from the game, it was also about shattering my old castle and just making this one look way better. I then began to get rid of all the purple wool that you see before connecting the different archways up. Then I began to work on these 4 small towers that sit on the edge of the second module of the sanctum. Nearing the end of the sanctum, I began to build one of the 4 towers that sit either side diagonally of the main tower of the sanctum, and of course I made it hexagonally so you guys will see the design come together. I pasted these in the 4 corners of the Champions Hall before I began work on the main central tower. Now in the game, the main central tower is slightly bigger than the 4 that I just pasted in, so I made sure that I got those proportions correct, and of course it's a hexagonal shape, so we made sure that we had that dialed in. I started by raising it up as high as I needed to, and then if I needed to make adjustments to the height as I went along, I would do so as necessary. Here I'm just separating the central tower into 4 parts with lime wool, and then once I set that precedent, I immediately got to work from the bottom up on the central tower. I outlined the 4 different archways after doing the second module to the central tower. And then I put in the 4 very skinny towers on top of the Champions Hall, in between all 5 of these towers outlined with yellow wool. I then created the final of the archways in Hyrule Castle's exterior at the top of the sanctum before I copy and pasted it 3 more times. Once I knocked out these archways, I immediately got to work on the last 2 modules of the central tower. It was really fun to watch this come together from afar as I was building on it. I then finished up the 4th and final module at the top of the central tower, and with that, the central tower of the sanctum was complete. I then made minor adjustments around the sanctum, such as these archways and a couple of ridges within the terrain. I also did these pillars under the sanctum underpass. The front of the sanctum also had a pathway outside of it in the front, and it also had more and more pillars underneath its underpass, as I stated earlier. I also created the 4 red banners in the corners of the sanctum and connected them up to the archway at the bottom. Finally, 2 more things were needed before the exterior of this castle was complete. I first outlined where the paths would go all throughout the castle, and I put these in. I started using magenta wool as the outer edge of the path, and then I used lime green wool and did a 2-block wide line on the inside of the magenta wool. I would use a brush to replace the magenta wool with stone and the lime green wool with cobblestone before putting stone brick on the inside of the path, similar to how it is in the game. And then last but not least, I took all the shrubbery and the dead trees that we created earlier, pasted them all around the castle, and with that, the exterior of Hyrule Castle was complete. Thank you guys so much if you stuck all the way to the end of this movie. If you did enjoy, leave me a comment telling me what you think about the castle. I think it turned out much nicer than my original one. For part 2, I want to go ahead and build the interiors, all the rooms, before ruining the exterior and interior. And then finally, I want to build the 5 great columns that sit outside of the castle. I want to break this build series up into 17 different parts. So there's 15 different Sheikah Towers in Breath of the Wild, and then Hyrule Castle would be 2 parts, making a total of 17 different episodes. For part 3, I think I definitely want to hit Central Hyrule after I do the interior of the castle. But then after that, we can go wherever you guys really want to go. It doesn't matter to me. If you like these kinds of builds and build series, please consider subscribing. It really will help me out. I'd really appreciate it. I have 5 other Zelda maps that I want to build, but I'll talk more about those later on. But yeah, with all of that out of the way, I've been ZainnCraft. I hope you guys did enjoy part 1 of building Breath of the Wild in Minecraft, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Ready, set, go.